Hello, everyone. Thank you to today's webinar. My name is Kris Greiner. I'm the Vice President of Global Sales for Scylla. And with me today, I have Amanda Sassano from Alertus and James McJunkin, GSIS, who is also a Scylla advisor. So today we're going to be talking about how to make your surveillance system proactive rather than reactive in active shooter scenarios, and draw on the expertise of James McJunkin and the solution, the capabilities of Alertus, as well as the capabilities of Scylla, and how those two solutions integrate to make a more reactive solution in an active shooter scenario or situation. So welcome, Jim.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Amanda.
Welcome, Amanda.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Kris, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate that. You know, in the security field, which I've been a part of for more years than I can count now. You know, we're always searching for ways to do it, you know, better, cheaper, faster. And so, you know, with all of the technology that's out there, you know, there's a wide variety of choices that can be made. And I think the issue for us was, or for us at the last couple of businesses that I was head of security for, we had different situations and different use scenarios that we had to match with a combination of technology and also, don't forget, personnel training and protocols and procedures, because unless those items, the technology is great, but if your people aren't trained to utilize that technology to its maximum capacity, and then your entire security approach or methodology isn't designed to, you know, detect and respond as quickly as you possibly can, then I think you're missing the point. A case in point is just about everybody has a CCTV camera system. And CCTV cameras are great because they provide you with a sort of a very quick approach to identifying a location that has a problem, and then being able to switch on a camera so that you can monitor it, and then that allows you to direct resources to solve the incident. So whether that's your own personnel, security personnel, or whether it involves police or FBI or some other sort of tactical approach, those cameras can be very helpful to you in orchestrating that. But the problem with CCTV is that it's somewhat dormant. So unless you happen to be looking at the camera where the incident occurs, you can always go backwards and recount what happened, or you can use it during an active situation to track what's going on there. But in order to turn it from a sort of a reactive tool to a proactive tool, you need technology that's over and above most CCTV camera systems. So that's what our problem was, you know, at the Cubs, for instance. I was at the Chicago Cubs for a couple of years there, and we had, you know, a number of cameras. We had somewhere around 1,200 cameras between the campus in Arizona and the campus in Chicago. So our ability to watch all 1,200 cameras, as you can imagine, from one single joint operations center, was pretty limited. And you were able, and my operators were very, very good at going over and finding the right camera so that they could monitor the issue once they were able to cue into it. But what we needed was, because we had situations where people were busy, so the people in the Joint Operations Center are working other issues or answering phones or doing something where their attention is not directed at a particular TV screen where a particular camera is being displayed. And so we had people that would try to enter entrances of the stadium, for instance, during the middle of the night when there was no event going on. The stadium wasn't open; those entrances were closed, and people were not there staffing them. Or in some cases, they tried to climb the exterior of the building, which creates a different problem, because if someone was to fall and be injured, that could create liability issues for the stadium, for the company. And it just goes on and on and on as far as what type of risk you're identifying and trying to mitigate. So we searched long and hard for the right technology to augment and maximize what we were already doing. And Scylla, was perfect, for us. And then when you look into situations where you need a response, or where you have individuals who could endanger others, you need a technology that allows you to communicate in very quickly and very broadly with a very large set of staff. And I'm not talking about security staff, because they already have radios and they're already responding to situations and listening and monitoring situations. I'm talking about the people who are just normally working, employees that are normally working inside that office building, that might become endangered as a result of the movement of a bad guy, or maybe it's not even a bad guy. Maybe it's a fire or some other situation that where you've got people that are, because of their location, are endangered. So a system like Alertus allows you to communicate with those people very quickly, and to manage evacuations or shelters in place, whatever it is that you think you need to do operationally to maximize or to mitigate the risk there. In those combination, that collision of technology, if it's properly set up with your protocols, training, and your response planning, allows you to quickly mitigate risk. I'll give you a couple of examples. I already mentioned the attempted entry at an entrance that's closed, or trying to scale the stadium, but we also were able to use it as in a unique way. High angle shot shooters like were in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, which created a massive loss of life. Being able to detect that type of an incident, especially when the threat comes from a building that isn't owned on campus or isn't owned by the organization that's supporting that, puts you in a position where you need to be able to figure out, hopefully proactively identify a potential shooter, and get all eyes on that, and then get response moving in that direction, probably through a police department, in the case of Chicago, or any other place in the United States, or anywhere in the world probably. But we were able to use a camera that's placed high up in the stadium, that gave us a 360-degree view of the skyline around Wrigley Field. And then in conjunction with Scylla, we're able to identify what that baseline activity was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then because of Scylla's technology, being able to trigger an anomaly-based notifications. If we saw something that didn't fit the pattern, or if the system saw something that didn't fit the pattern, it would automatically be flashed into the Joint Operations Center for a human to review, to determine whether or not there was a problem that had to be responded to quickly, because in those cases, you don't have much time. So that was another example. Or in the case of an active shooter that barges through the lobby, now you have another problem, because you have employees that are at risk. So with Alertus, in conjunction with and tied tightly to Scylla, with a sound operational plan for your personnel, you are now in a position to be absolutely the best that you can be at sealing down, knocking down, and eliminating that threat as fast as you possibly can. So I would say that this combination of technology is really, really impressive. And I would, offer you guys the opportunity to walk everybody that's on through the individual products now, and kind of talk about your individual product, and see how that linkage goes. But think, as you go through that, how in an organizational setting, you're the security director, how are you going to utilize this technology to maximize your personnel response, so that you're absolutely the best that you can be. And that's what I'd recommend as you go forward.
So Jim, based on your experience with the FBI, and your time when you were, helping, keep everything secure, it seems like the active shooting incidents, we can barely go a day without having a incident somewhere, someplace, right? Every day they're increasing. Have you found in the past that most organizations are prepared for this? Do they have active shooting active shooting plans in place, or do they all just kind of cross their fingers and hope it doesn't happen to me attitude?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the industry, and if you're looking at, not only sports stadiums, but, regular campuses where businesses reside, whether it be in a city, intercity, or whether it, be on more of a suburban type campus. I think that over time, most companies have created a response plan that they in many cases, unfortunately, put on a shelf. So once it's written, once it's approved, once it's discussed, it then gets put on a shelf. The problem with that is that that's not integrated into your day in and day out operational tempo. People have a tendency to forget, and then when you forget, then you rely on you always rely on in an emergency on sort of habits. And so sometimes if those habits aren't good habits, you can make the situation worse because you do the wrong thing or respond in the wrong manner, and then you end up making the situation more terrible than it could have been. So I think that planning is something you see quite often in corporate America, but I don't know that they train to it to the degree that I would expect to train to it, because I wanted my people to make sure that they knew worst case what they were going to do in every situation, and then the routine is always covered, because you always have that mindset up front that you're going to be able to react to a disaster very quickly. So I would say yes, but it's not the solution. The planning itself and the plan itself isn't the solution. It's making sure that the plan fits with your personnel, fits with your technology, and maximizes those resources that you have available to you.
So does it happen often then, through your experience, that when something bad happens, an active shooter is identified, whether it's Scylla picking it up in real time, or whether it's just somebody simply dialing 911 and reporting it to an organization, people panic, they don't know what direction to go? If I'm trying to evacuate, am I running towards a threat? Am I running away from the threat?
And that's exactly right. And I think and you bring up 2 points there. One is, not all U.S. corporations have armed security. Very few do, actually. There are a number of ones, depending on the business type, that have armed security, but I would say the majority, whatever that majority is, percentage-wise, are not armed. So when you have an armed shooter in a building like that, and you have security personnel that are unarmed, you now have a situation where that personnel, you don't want to endanger the security personnel unnecessarily either. So they become sort of an observation post. They're not necessarily going to directly confront that shooter. They are going to try to get to as close to that shooter without endangering themselves, so that they can report back to the command center, so that they can then bring in police that are better trained to manage a situation. So technology like Alertus allows you to sort of move the people who are threatened away from the threat quickly, so that there's nobody to shoot when the shooter arrives or gets to a position. So if you can eliminate their ability to hurt people by taking those people out of harm's way, that's an effective mitigation strategy. But it's difficult because people do, untrained people, or even trained people, sometimes run the wrong direction, or they go towards the danger instead of away from the danger. So you have to be able to clearly identify, where the threat is, and then to be able to direct those people away. The other situation, and we've seen this a number of times in the U.S., is that when law enforcement arrives, law enforcement usually is going to respond with a uniformed patrol officer. That uniformed patrol officer, even if it's 5, 6, or 15, are still going to be in a situation where they're having to assess the situation before they rush into danger. So we saw it in Florida at the school shooting. We saw it in Aurora at the corporate shooting that we had a few years ago. And in both of those situations, law enforcement there was a delay from the time they first arrived to the time that they actually took on the shooter. And so, where you can close that gap, you need to, and that's why technology like Scylla that will actually take the guesswork out of tracking a shooter. So in a situation without Scylla, your camera operators, most of them are probably pretty good at this, but they have to then go from one camera to another to find and keep the shooter in view. They've got to manipulate that CCTV camera system, which sometimes could have hundreds or thousands of cameras in it. And they're going to have to know by the way that those cameras were named, what's the next camera, and they have to be so familiar with the layout of the building that they know which camera to go to in order to find that shooter. So the time and the possibility of human error there is going to exasperate the situation. With Scylla, it's going to lock on to the shooter, and it's going to automatically follow that shooter through the building. Being able to then not have to worry about that allows the security personnel to get a law enforcement officer, either a first responder or a tactical person, into the command center so that they can then see what they need to see in order to inform their responders, their officers that are actually going to go in there and confront the shooter with as much intelligence as they possibly can about that shooter's location, type of weapon, how often is he reloading, all of those things that matter to a tactical officer that most security personnel aren't thinking about. That's the other side of this. So it's not just the corporate security response, but the police, when they arrive, are going to delay as well, because they don't know what they're running into, and they have officer safety issues as well. You don't want to run 5 officers in and get them injured or worse. Now you've got 5 more victims, and you still have a shooter. So it's not always, most people think when the police arrive, they're going to barge right into the room and take care of the problem. Not always the case. Not always the case.
So it's important to have a plan. It's important to have the tools to make the process.
And that plan can't be just something that, if this, then that kind of a document that it's in a 3-ring binder on somebody's shelf, because nobody's going to go to that shelf and start reading that 3-ring binder when there's a problem. If they are, you probably should fire that person. What you need to do is to take that plan, integrate your technology, make sure you're choosing the right technology to allow you to maximize your personnel resources and your response protocols. And you have to practice it. So I don't even think it's necessarily, even those companies that do routine tabletop exercises don't really get into the detail of how this stuff works in a situation. You have to do live practice, and you have to train for it frequently, like weekly or monthly, or at least quarterly, to make sure that your personnel know exactly what they're doing. And the same goes for the mass notification situation. So in Amanda's situation, and I'm sure she's going to walk through Alertus for us in a second, but that being able to tell the casual employee, the person that's just sitting at their desk, to go left, not right, so you're not, or to use a certain stairwell, or go to the other, or to get under your desk. Those are situations that information is as critical to a victim or a potential victim as it is to a law enforcement officer. So connecting those two technologies and integrating them into your personnel training and response protocols and practicing that is critical.
So preparation, huge for an organization. You got to have that plan. You got to practice that plan. You got to prepare for when that plan happens. So everybody just instinctively knows what to do, and you have to have that proper tool to communicate to everyone and tell those people what to do, not only the staff, but also the visitors who may not have any idea of how to evacuate or a safe way to do that. That's where we, Alertus excels. So Amanda.
Yeah, I think I think the other thing to think of mine is in an emergency situation, or even in a routine BAU type situation, if you can eliminate, the human brain is best at making quick decisions by understanding all of the available information. The brain is an amazing tool, right? And so if your people are trained to use their brain, I don't think there's a computer in the world that can match the human brain and its ability to make really good decisions. But if you can use technology to eliminate all of the guesswork and the menial and manual steps that are required to get that intelligence to the human brain, you're better off. So what I would say is, if you're a company that wants to find a technology out of the box that's going to solve your problem, you're going to spend a lot of money, and you're going to spend your entire career doing that, and you're never going to solve your problem. You really have to focus on, we used to say, putting lipstick on a pig. Putting lipstick on a pig is great. It makes the pig look good. But really what you need is a better pig. And so it's really getting under, and that's the situation. You have to understand whether you just need lipstick or whether you need a better pig. And that's how I would approach this. Determine what you need, determine what your goals and plans are, and then pick your technology to maximize that pathway. Because if you don't, you're just throwing good money after bad.
You spoke about the human brain and how the human brain analyzes, processes things. That's similar to what Scylla does. Scylla is a deep learning neural network. And so we try to emulate the brain, the decision-making process, and replace that human when identifying threats. But once we identify that threat, which we can do very well, then we have to have an efficient way to manage people and remove them from the threat. And that's where an Alertus would come in. So Amanda, maybe you can talk a little bit about Alertus. And
Yep.
once Scylla identifies a threat and triggers that alert, then some of the things that you're capable of doing.
Yep, absolutely. And definitely enjoying the conversation thus far. So hopefully the folks who have attended are getting something out of it as well. But if you aren't familiar with Alertus, to the point of, Scylla really being that proactive piece of the threat assessment and determining and really assessing that information coming in and bringing that in. Alertus is really the mechanism in which you can circulate the information to the location or the parties that you need to be notified depending on what the incident is. So we really focus on pulling that information in, applying some logic and some intelligent thought behind the messaging and things that are going to be dispersed, but ultimately, depending on the type of threat and the organization and what resources and assets that you have, you probably already have a lot of the endpoints that can be utilized and leveraged in an emergency situation to ensure that every person that you're responsible for, whether that is a emergency personnel or an employee or a guest, a contractor, that they're made aware of these incidents very quickly and efficiently. So we have a number of ways in which we are able to be that alerting endpoint. And it can be dynamic. So if, Scylla is detecting a threat in a specific area, Alertus can ingest that information and then have a multi-layered approach in notifying the folks that are either closest to that threat or in the vicinity, or maybe if it's a multi-location complex, you may want location A to go into lockdown and B and C to evacuate, while still notifying your security personnel to then assess and notify law enforcement and how they can respond. So our average activation time is anywhere from 5 to 13 seconds. And as we know, with any active shooter incident, the active shooter incident has happened and gone well outside of that time frame. So being able to get the critical information to the people that that need that to prevent loss of life is really where we excel. But certainly having the integrations with Scylla and your other facility infrastructure, whether that's on a security standpoint or even building automation, fire, we're able to ingest that information, apply some logic and some intelligibility, and get that information to the right people in a timely manner, like I said, to really prevent that loss of life.
Very nice. Communication is huge. When you're trying to be efficient, get everybody out and minimize the damage. So some Alertus has been around for a while. We've got a very impressive list of customers.
Yep. So we've been around. We're kind of a dinosaur in the space. Been around for, I guess, 20 years now. We serve across all industry verticals, as you can see here, some of our prominent customers, but even everything from a small house of worship all the way up to a stadium, a biotech facility, some of the largest colleges and universities, federal sector. So realistically, our solution is very a la carte and customized to each and every application. So it's not a one size fits all. So we're able to really adapt and help address a lot of the problems or concerns that folks have, no matter what their particular situation is within their organization structure.
Terrific. Well, thanks for that. So now that we know, once the threat has been identified, we know how to communicate with everyone and get them safely away from the damage or from the danger. We can talk a little bit about Scylla and how we identify that threat in real time. So Scylla develops AI-powered video analytics for real-time threat detection. So we're monitoring existing cameras and existing infrastructure that's already in place. We're adding intelligence to it, and we watch for the physical threat that we're told to watch for. So Jim, just like you said, the human brain, well, that's Scylla. Scylla is the brain that can watch every camera, whether it's dozens, hundreds, or thousands of cameras in an organization in real time. We never blink, we never get tired, we never look away. It just quietly sits there and watches for that specific threat that you tell it to watch for. And then when we see it, it turns that security system into a proactive solution instead of reactive. Historically, something bad happens, you go check the video footage, you say, yep, this is the bad guy, and now let's go try and catch him. But when every second counts, like in an active shooting scenario or situation, we're going to tell you in real time so that we can get people away from that danger.
Yeah, and Kris, I want to, and also, don't think of this from your, anyone that's on this call that's thinking about utilizing this kind of technology. That threat doesn't have to be somebody with a gun. Let's just say, for instance, your CEO has an office, and in your CEO's office, nobody's supposed to be in there, outside of normal business hours, but he or she has a ton of like really expensive knickknacks in their office. So if the camera system, if you're from an insider threat perspective, if you were trying to detect whether or not someone entered that office without permission or without being, cleared to do so, you could actually train this system to tell you when you had somebody that was in the vicinity of your CEO's office at a time where they're not authorized to be there. And that allows you to, and that's true for a server room or any other area of the business, the Cubs, for instance, the locker rooms for the players, those spaces where, you have a lot of possibly expensive personal equipment in there, and being able to tell whether someone's there that's not supposed to be there, whether they're an employee or whether they're, an intruder, is another opportunity for this software to work.
Exactly.
You just have to be able to understand your threat and train it.
Yeah, so it's getting more out of the assets that you have. So a camera that's sitting there just quietly recording, you add the intelligence to it, you add Scylla to it, and all of a sudden you can set the zones. And if so much as a hand or a foot enters that zone, we know it's a human, and we're going to trigger that real-time alert. So if you have somebody walking up to the outdoor and they're checking maybe office hours, we're going to ignore that person if it's a public space. But the second they enter that private space during a time that's restricted, we're going to send that real-time real-time alert, tell security that they're there.
And that's the definition of changing your system from reactive to proactive, because now you're in a position to have a system notify you of an event that you care about without having to watch 1,200 cameras simultaneously. You just have to train those cameras and identify those zones and make sure that you're taking some time with Scylla's expert staff to make sure that you're able to train your system to tell you what you care about.
No, exactly. So here's another example of a real-time detection. So here's a simulation of 3 different rooms. You have a gunman who walked into the first room. He was identified as the threat. We picked up the gun. Then he walked into the second room, and he walked into the third room with his gun hidden. And so while we alerted him as the active shooter, we still tracked him as he moves from camera to camera throughout the organization and give those real-time location notifications. So law enforcement, when they're coming in, they know exactly who to look for. Even if that person has hidden his gun, ditched his gun, he's trying to blend in to get away, they still know exactly where that person is and who that person is. And, it not only aids in the safety of the people, the employees, the students, but also the officers themselves as they're responding. So they know exactly who it is they're coming for or who they need to apprehend. So some of the
and where they are.
Exactly. So in addition to the gun, you can watch for things like objects, actions, and behavior anomalies. So we've trained Scylla we could train it to do literally anything because it's a brain. You know, you can teach it to do anything, but we've trained it to watch for those objects, actions, and anomalies as it pertains to physical safety and security. And so everything's underneath that umbrella. And so, you know, things like body temperature detection, intrusion detection, abnormal behavior like fights, that person tracking from camera, active shooter tracking. In fact, we were used at the Iowa State Fair for missing child locator. So if somebody has a missing child, they text their photo or their image of that child to Fair Police, and now every camera on the grounds goes out and actively looks for that person. And at the same time, we're actually looking for guns and weapons too. Here's an example. This is a real-time detection. At the fair, they actually sold a couple vendors that sold toy guns, and they were to be completely sealed and hidden and not opened until they left the fairgrounds. But here's an example of a child who couldn't wait. So you'll see we have a very accurate detection of a toy gun. And so Fair Police are going to get they got a real-time notification that, hey, there's a child here with a toy gun. So even before anybody could dial 911 to report that, they know exactly what's going on in real time. And so they don't storm in and some sort of a tragedy happens. You know, information is power. And so they have that information in advance. So again, face recognition, we know in some parts of the country, face recognition is a bad word. In other parts of the country, it's utilized daily. So that is something that we do extremely well, but it's not something that really separates or differentiates us in the marketplace. So we have that full facial recognition capabilities. It's extremely accurate, 99 point a whole lot of nines in our accuracy. We also work with drones and moving cameras and moving backgrounds. So whether that's pan tilt zooms, whether that is drones, dash cams, body cams, helicopters, we can do all of our detections from those cameras. So we have our objects detections, intrusion detections, object tracking. We have a whole lot of case studies. You talked about active shooter scenarios and active shooting situations. So in a large arena or stadium where you have a lot of experience, Jim, there's I've heard you talk about there being a void right now with an efficient way to identify active shooters. That you know, if it's property or buildings that are not owned by that stadium that are potential sniper positions. You know, there's not any technology really out there other than Scylla who can go out and patrol or tour those different areas, zoom in from, you know, quarter mile, half mile away, and zoom in on that location and look for a person, and specifically a person with a weapon.
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly in a downtown area. Some of these apartment buildings have swimming pools on the roof. So during the summer months, you might find a lot of activity up on that roof where people are moving around and doing, you know, things that would look normal to a situation in July, you know, when the weather's warm and people are up there on that rooftop. But in January in Chicago, there's probably not very many people up there on the roof swimming. But if you happen to see, you know, if you have a concert or you have some other type of activity going on, and you detect, and the system is constantly mapping and sort of doing the behavior analysis around. They're not identifying the people on. The system isn't identifying the people on the. So it's not like a facial recognition system solely. This is much better because in this case you don't have to know who the person is. You just need to know that the person is there and that presence is an anomaly to what the normal behavior is. And then if in the beauty of the system is that if it notifies the Joint Operations Center of you know, whatever business you're running, you can then train smart people and real brains on the area and decide whether or not it's a worker who's up there repairing a water pipe or something that's maybe anomalous from the system's perspective, but you wouldn't have noticed it at all if the system had identified the anomaly and brought it to the attention of the security personnel. If it's much more you know dangerous than that, because you've got somebody that, say it's a potential suicide, a jumper, or it's a potential shooter, these are opportunities where you can identify situations that might not directly affect you, or they might, but you can actually bring medical or police response to that area and maybe save a life that had nothing to do with a threat to this facility, but the anomalous behavior detected, notification, and then reaction by trained staff, might go a long way. So these are some of the benefits, potential benefits of a situation, especially in an area where you don't control the territory, you don't control the geography. A high-rise building might or might not have security there. So you dispatching one of your personnel to go half a mile away to knock on the door of an office complex or an office building or an apartment building to find out that they don't have security is just a waste of time. Especially when you don't know the nature of the activity. So this system would allow you to very quickly understand it and mitigate it, or just ignore it if you realize that it's just somebody replacing a water pipe.
And yeah, I think you mentioned earlier that it's just not always a gun right out of the gate. Sometimes it's just abnormal behavior or somebody doing something really crazy. Like here, we got a guy who's beating ATMs with a hammer, right? We're going to identify that in real time and send somebody. Who knows if he's got a gun in his hand, but he obviously has a weapon, being the hammer. So you could, detect that in real time and get security there to identify that. So a lot of the videos we can run, if anybody ever has any question about how Scylla would react, we can run everything through, not only in real time, but we also can do forensics. So here's an example of a video that somebody had sent to us that they just downloaded from the Daily Mail and said, how would you identify a ATM detection if somebody's beating with a hammer? Well, we can tell you. And here's an example of us doing that.
Yeah, I think that, in a little bit more detail, it's because that camera system is also in the AI capability of the software is watching other people using that ATM day in and day out who aren't swinging a hammer at it. And so the idea is, using the AI functionality, is that it tells you the difference between that guy and the other 5,000 people that use those ATMs in the last week, is that this guy's got a hammer over his head and he's swinging it. So that's the anomalous behavior that would allow you to detect it. And then let's say in a situation where you've got a bank that's watching, or an ATM servicing company that's watching those ATMs, you've got not only that bank of ATMs, but you have thousands potentially of other banks of ATMs that you're also responsible for monitoring. So the question is, what camera are you watching at the time that the hammer is swung? And if you're not happen to be on that camera at the time, you're going to miss it. It now becomes an historical fact. You can play that video back from your CCTV to police or to the owner of the ATMs, but you're really not in a position to do anything about it until after the crime has been committed. In this case, it gives you instant detection capability, and then it's a matter of your process and protocols as to how well and how fast you respond to it. And maybe you can catch the guy.
No, exactly.
Maybe that
right.
hammer's not being swung at an ATM. Maybe it's swung at an ATM customer.
Exactly. And, when we're talking, what I'm showing here is abnormal shopping behavior. So, you can't get in somebody's head and know whether they're going to steal, but we can watch them and see if they look left, they look right, they look up at the camera, they look back down. Somebody that's shopping differently than everybody else or acting differently. And that same thing could be, relayed to an active shooter. You got somebody in a crowd and they're walking around, they're looking left, they're looking right, and everybody else is having a good time there as a fan for the day. But we're going to pick out that one guy who's acting differently and say, hey, security might want to get another look on this guy and watch him a little closer.
Hey, Kris, talk a minute, if you will. This is a great example, and I just have a question on my own. But this person that's acting differently or oddly in this shot with his shopping behavior, does that have anything to do with his racial profile? And how would you argue or defend if someone said, hey, this could lead to racial profiling?
Scylla has taken extraordinary attempts to be ethical in our creation of our AI. So we don't log, store, record any information. We do not identify a human by sex, by gender, by race, by ethnicity. We just identify that person as a human who is violating a rule. So literally, there is no bias in our detections at all. So we're not, we're literally just looking at that guy as a human. So that's a great question, Jim. It comes up quite a bit. I know there's other solutions out there that have had lazy programmers. They've had lazy, poor solutions that that are biased against specific races, ethnicities, sexes, even age. But with Scylla, none of that is taken into account. We're just looking for that threat.
Thanks, Kris. I know that's an issue, and I think most responsible corporations are looking at that type of thing within their own security procedures and processes and technologies. So it's nice to know that you guys have already sort of covered that before you get to a problem.
When we're talking about corporations and slip and fall, for example, we're talking about return on investment when somebody puts a solution like ours in place. If somebody's walking, they slip, they fall, all of a sudden they know that the organization may keep or retain that video footage for 30, 60, 90 days. All of a sudden they come back. If it's a staged incident, they'll come back in 6 months and hit them with a mystery lawsuit. And all of a sudden that video has not been retained, it's been overwritten, and now it's their word against the organization's word. And if an organization knows in real time that somebody had slipped or they'd fallen or they tripped, or they can log that incident and defend themselves against a future mystery lawsuit. And that's an incredible ROI. We're talking tens, hundreds, or millions of dollars, depending on the damage that somebody's claiming.
And this actually works well in large crowd situations as well. So that when you have 40,000 people crowded into a single arena somewhere, if you're using the behavioral anomaly process effectively, you can tell whether or not the crowd's responding to, like I say, a fight. You talked about that earlier, but also if somebody goes down with a medical issue, that's going to create a different dynamic with the people that surround that individual. So you have somebody proned out or passed out in a seat or in a stadium seat. If you're properly training the system to detect that type of activity as an anomaly, you can actually much more quickly identify and send medical assistance to someone who needs it, rather than waiting for the traditional, I'm going to text you or I'm going to pick up a phone somewhere and call 911 or call the security. Who knows when you walk into a stadium really what the name of the phone number is of the security personnel? I mean, at the Joint Operations Center. If you really think about it, most people aren't even looking, it doesn't even register to them that they should put the phone number of the security personnel in their phone. When something bad happens, you're just looking around looking for someone to help you. So in this case, it allows you to do that early detection as well from a medical situation, not just a violent situation.
Exactly. Now here's maybe a case where Alertus would come in, and if this is an actual tailgate from Los Angeles or the Raiders and the Chargers, and it was a fight in the tailgating. And it identifies a fight that is beginning to start, and it starts to escalate. And so here, security could get their eyes on it. We know in advance, we see in real time what's going on. They can get somebody over there, stop it before it starts to escalate and get a crowd out of control. And if it does, well, then there's a case when Alertus could come in, and I believe there's a public PA system or different methods that Alertus could come in to help control and mitigate the effort in here where there's a large crowd of people.
Yep, certainly. We have solutions for indoor and outdoor audio that can be pre-recorded or live voice, and can, notify them that they are being watched and monitored, and that emergency or security personnel are going to be responding. So hopefully to de-escalate the situation automatically.
Very nice. So, well, I think we're getting towards the bottom of the hour. Here's an example of Scylla working on a drone with a moving background. We're going to do intruder detection. So we're going to identify humans that are out in real time. So drones that are on patrols can identify humans, and specifically humans with guns. If you have the right cameras that have the resolution to see a 4K or an 8K camera, then we can identify those as the drones are patrolling. So let me get back to the presentation. I'm getting.
Chris, might be a good time to open this up to our guests to find out if there's any questions or comments or recommendations.
Great idea. So Anastasia, do we have any questions? Any questions from anybody? If not, we can.
Not yet, we don't have, but Q&A session is open. So if you have any questions, please submit them.
Very nice. And Amanda, how would, if anybody has any questions about Alertus, how would they get in touch? Would they get in touch with you directly?
Yep, so they can certainly get in touch with me directly. We also have a sales@alertus.com as well as a channel at alertus.com. So there's a few options, but most certainly feel free to reach out to me directly. My contact information should be circulated following the presentation.
Terrific. And as well from the Scylla side, if anybody has any information or questions, you can reach out to myself directly. You can go directly to our website. We have a contact us page and contact us telephonically or emails. So.
And also don't forget GSIS, because remember the technology is great, but if you haven't, if you don't have a strong protocol or response plan or your ability to integrate technology into your daily operations is something that you have trouble with, we can help you there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for your time and contribution today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Amanda.